The next two checkpoints, checkpoint 6, checkpoint 7, have to do with absolute value. So we want to go over that. Absolute value in the book, they tell you how to remove the absolute value bars from an expression. And there are two things. One is if you're taking the absolute value of a positive number, for example, the absolute value of 2. And if that's the case, we can simply take the absolute value bars off and get the number 2. Absolute value of pi is a positive number. We can remove absolute value, so it's just going to be pi. Okay. The important thing to remember, or one of the important things, of course, is when you have a negative number. For example, we have the absolute value of -3. According to the definition, to remove the absolute value bars, we have to take the opposite of the number that's inside, if it's negative. -3 is obviously negative, so according to the definition, that's the same as the opposite of -3. The opposite of -3, of course, is equal to 3, so the absolute value of -3 is 3. That's the same way we're going to deal with these expressions. Here we have the absolute value of 1 minus the square root of 2. So the important question is what's inside these absolute values bars a positive or a negative number? If you take 1 and subtract the square root of 2, is it going to be positive or negative? Square root of 2 is approximately 1.4. So if you take 1 and you subtract 1.4, you're going to get about -0.4. So it is a negative number. That means we need to apply this idea where we take the opposite of what's in here. So to evaluate this, we'll take the opposite of this expression. It's important to use parentheses. We're taking the opposite of the entire expression, not just the first part. So this will be the opposite of 1 minus the square root of 2. And one of our properties involving negatives, we'll take this, we can get rid of the parentheses by distributing this negative. So this is the same as -1, and then we take the opposite of the next part, and this is minus square root of 2, but when you do apply the opposite here, it's going to end up being plus the square root of 2. If you want, another way you could write that expression would be, you could put the square root of 2 first, square root of 2 minus 1. That's the same as that, but that's how that would, what you would end up with when you remove the absolute value bars. Okay, the next example is the absolute value of pi minus 3. We'll go about it the same way. Pi is an irrational number, but to think about this, we can put an approximation in. Pi, as you recall, is about 3.14. So this would be 3.14 minus 3, which would be about 0.14. It would be a positive number. So remember, if you're taking the absolute value of a positive number, you can simply take the absolute value bars off, and this is equal to pi minus 3. And that's the exact way to write it. You should write it exactly unless they tell you to give an approximation. So we would leave the pi in there. If we try to take the pi out, put 3.14 in, you're going to end up with 0.14. It's actually an approximation. Many times in math we want to have the exact answer, so we'd leave the pi in. The next example here, C, is the absolute value of x over x. And they're not telling you what x is equal to, but they're telling you that it's greater than 0. So that will allow us to work with the absolute value expression here. Okay, since x is greater than 0, if you take the absolute value of something greater than 0, we can simply remove the absolute value symbol. So this expression is the same as x, and then the denominator will not change. It'll be x over x. Since x is not equal to 0, it's greater than 0, we can simplify this. Any number divided by itself is equal to 1, as long as it's not 0. So the answer to this would be 1 when you simplify it. Checkpoint 7 uses absolute value, or you should do that absolute value with the idea of distance. Okay, here they want you to find the distance between -4 and 5 on the number line. And according to the definition in the book, we can subtract those two numbers, take the absolute value, and then we will find the distance. It doesn't matter what order you subtract them in. In fact, let's do it in both orders. Let's take negative 4 minus 5, and then we take the absolute value. Negative 4 minus 5 is negative 9, so this will be the absolute value of negative 9, which is the opposite of negative 9, which is 9. So the distance between those two points on the number line is 9. If you would subtract them in the other order, 5 minus negative 4, we should get the same thing. 5 minus negative 4 is 9, so we have the absolute value of 9. 9 is positive, absolute value of 9 is 9. So you end up with the same thing regardless of the order that you subtract them in if you put the absolute value in.